In the summer of 1973, a White House aide named Alexander Butterfield sat down before the Senate Watergate Committee and revealed, almost as an afterthought, that President Richard Nixon had installed a secret taping system in the White House. Every conversation in the Oval Office, every phone call, every meeting had been recorded automatically since 1971. The room went quiet. Within days, the special prosecutor investigating Watergate subpoenaed the tapes. Nixon refused to hand them over. The legal battle that followed went all the way to the Supreme Court. Nixon lost. He resigned on August 9, 1974, the only American president ever to do so. But here's the question that historians and Nixon's own advisors have been asking ever since. At any point between July 1973, when the tapes were revealed, and the Supreme Court ruling in July 1974, Nixon could have destroyed them. The tapes were his property. There was no law that clearly prohibited their destruction at the time they were subpoenaed. Several of his closest advisors urged him to burn them. His own legal team told him the political cost of destruction would be high, but survivable. He didn't burn them, he fought for them, he lost them, and they destroyed him. Why? To understand the tape's decision, you have to understand what Nixon was actually trying to protect and what he feared the tapes contained. The Watergate scandal began with a break-in. On June 17, 1972, 5 men connected to Nixon's re-election campaign were arrested while attempting to bug the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington. The break-in itself was a third-rate burglary, clumsy, unnecessary, and almost certainly ordered by overzealous campaign aides, without Nixon's direct knowledge. Nixon did not order the Watergate break-in. This is important because it means that what ultimately destroyed him was not the crime itself, but the cover-up. Within days of the arrest, Nixon began working to contain the political damage. He approved payments of hush money to the arrested burglars. He discussed using the CIA to obstruct the FBI investigation. He talked with aides about limiting what could be revealed in any subsequent inquiry. All of this was recorded. The tapes did not contain evidence of Nixon ordering the break-in. What they contained was evidence of Nixon personally directing the cover-up, obstruction of justice, abuse of power, the systematic use of the institutions of government to protect himself and his associates from the consequences of crimes committed in his name. This distinction mattered enormously. The cover-up, not the crime, was what made Nixon's position constitutionally untenable. And the tapes were the evidence of the cover-up. The White House taping system had been installed in February 1971 on Nixon's own orders. Nixon was not the first president to record White House conversations. Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, John Kennedy, and Lyndon Johnson had all used various recording systems at various times. Nixon knew this. He believed that the historical record of his presidency, particularly his foreign policy achievements, the opening of China, the détente with the Soviet Union, deserved to be preserved in his own words. The system was voice-activated and operated automatically. Nixon did not turn it on for individual conversations. It recorded everything. This meant that Nixon often forgot it was there and spoke with a frankness that he would not have used if he had been consciously aware of being recorded. When Butterfield revealed the system's existence, Nixon faced an immediate and terrible problem. He knew what was on the tapes. He knew they contained conversations that would be politically devastating, but he also knew, or believed, that they contained conversations that might exonerate him on some points, that showed him in a better light than the accounts of his enemies, that preserved his version of events. The tapes were simultaneously his greatest liability and, in his mind, potentially his greatest defense. Nixon's advisors were divided. Some urged immediate destruction, others argued against it. The case for burning the tapes was straightforward. Destroying evidence was legally risky, but the alternative, handing over recordings of the president discussing obstruction of justice, was certainly fatal. The political damage from destroying the tapes would be severe, but it might be survivable. Nixon could argue executive privilege, presidential confidentiality, the separation of powers. He could frame the destruction as protecting the institution of the presidency rather than himself personally. The case against burning was more complex and ultimately more persuasive to Nixon. First, Nixon genuinely believed for much of 1973 that the tapes would help him. He was selectively remembering the conversations, focusing on the moments where he had hesitated, where he had asked questions rather than given orders. where he could plausibly argue he had not fully understood what was being proposed. His lawyer, James St. Clair, later said that Nixon seemed to believe the tapes were exculpatory, that they would prove his innocence rather than his guilt. Second, Nixon was deeply, almost pathologically, concerned with his place in history. The tapes were the most complete record of a presidency ever created. Destroying them meant destroying the historical record he had so carefully assembled. It meant, in some sense, erasing himself. Third, and perhaps most important, Nixon did not believe for most of 1973 that he would actually be forced to hand the tapes over. He believed he could win the legal battle. He had won political battles before by fighting. His entire career had been defined by fighting back from impossible positions. He had lost the 1960 presidential election and the 1962 California gubernatorial race and come back to win the presidency in 1968. He did not believe this was different. He was wrong. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously in United States versus Nixon on July 24, 1974, that the president could not claim executive privilege to withhold evidence in a criminal investigation. Nixon had to hand over the tapes. Among them was what immediately became known as the smoking gun tape, a recording of a conversation between Nixon and his chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, on June 23, 1972, just 6 days after the Watergate break-in. On it, Nixon could be heard explicitly discussing using the CIA to block the FBI's investigation of the break-in. This was obstruction of justice, on tape in the president's own voice. Nixon's remaining political support collapsed within 48 hours. Republican congressional leaders told him that impeachment was certain and conviction likely. On August 8th, Nixon announced his resignation in a televised address. The following morning, he boarded a helicopter on the White House lawn and left. The question of why Nixon didn't burn the tapes is, at its heart, a question about how people in power make decisions when they are trapped between two catastrophic options. Nixon chose the option that preserved the possibility of survival, even though it was actually the more dangerous option. He could not bring himself to accept that the tapes were definitively damning. He could not accept that he could not fight his way out. He could not accept that the historical record he had worked so hard to create would have to be destroyed to save himself. His faith in his own ability to survive, the same faith that had carried him from political disgrace in 1962 to the White House in 1968, became the thing that destroyed him. He fought when he should have surrendered. He preserved what he should have burned, and in preserving it, he handed his enemies the weapon they needed. There is a broader lesson here that goes beyond Nixon. The people most likely to make catastrophically wrong decisions in a crisis are often not the reckless or the careless. They are the survivors, the people who have fought their way out of impossible situations before, and who believe on the basis of that experience that they can fight their way out again. Experience is sometimes wisdom, and sometimes it is the most dangerous thing in the room. Richard Nixon resigned the presidency because of a taping system he installed himself to record conversations he chose to have in a crisis he chose to fight rather than settle. He had the power to destroy the tapes. He had advisors who told him to. He had months in which he could have done it before the legal battle made it impossible. He didn't. Not because he was stupid, not because he didn't understand the danger, but because he believed, right up until the moment the Supreme Court ruled against him, that he could win, that the tapes would help him, that fighting was better than surrendering. He had been right about that before. He was catastrophically wrong about it this time, which raises the question that this case leaves permanently open. When is the right moment to stop fighting and accept that the position is lost? Nixon never found it, and in failing to find it, he became the only American president ever to resign from office, brought down not by his enemies, not by the press, not by the Democrats, but by his own voice, recorded on his own tapes in his own White House.